Good evening, everyone. Ukraine's army of soldiers and citizen soldiers have stunned the world with their tenacity and resolve. But Russian troops are not rolling over, but in fact rolling forward. Peace talks going nowhere today as Ukraine's second largest city, Kiev, came under intense shelling attack. Satellite images capture a miles-long Russian convoy of armored vehicles that could soon be headed to the capital of Kiev. Russia now bringing to bear 3/4 of its invasion force as it tries to regain momentum and choke off Ukrainian cities. But Russia feeling a squeeze of its own. More nations of the world, including normally neutral Switzerland, stepping up to isolate the Russian economy. Tonight, as the number of refugees flowing out of Ukrainian cities reaches 500,000, the International Criminal Court says it's opening an investigation into possible war crimes. Our correspondents are in place overseas and here in Washington. Richard Engel starts us off from the front lines.
Many U.S. intelligence officials predicted the Ukrainian military would have collapsed by now. But as Russia's assault is intensifying, so is Ukrainian resistance. Ukraine's military claims this drone video shows it taking out a convoy of Russian forces, while Ukraine's President Zelensky defied President Putin's demand that his country sever ties with the West, signing an application today to join the European Union, a process that could take years. The UN now says at least 7 children have been killed in the Russian onslaught. Officials in Kiev say among them is a 4th grader named Polina. Peace talks along the border have concluded for now. Russia saying progress is being made. Ukraine agreeing to more talks, but with low expectations. As Putin denounced the West as an empire of lies after earlier raising alarms, saying he was ordering Russia's nuclear defenses on higher alert. Although tonight, a senior American defense official says the U.S. has seen no movement of Russia's nuclear forces, and that 75% of Russia's troops along Ukraine's border are now in the country. One of their main targets today, the eastern city of Kharkiv. Russia attacked the city with what looked like indiscriminate fire. To the south, the small port city of Berdyansk was also attacked. The mayor says Russian troops took over the city. But even then, people didn't give up. Protesters confronting the Russian troops and heckling them, shouting, "Berdyansk is Ukraine." But Russian forces seem to have a bigger plan in mind. This convoy of Russian equipment and troops reportedly stretches for 17 miles outside of Kiev. But Russia's advance has been plagued by logistics failures. Some Russian vehicles literally running out of gas. A Ukrainian man pulling alongside this armored vehicle. Broken down, he asks. The diesel is out, the soldier says. I can only tow you back to Russia, the Ukrainian says. And the soldier laughs. In Kiev, residents are preparing for street-to-street fighting, mixing Molotov cocktails as fast as they can fill bottles.
That's why we are fighting for our freedom, for our self-reliance, for ourselves, for our houses, for our children. We'll stand till the end.
We followed volunteers who brought the firebombs in wheelbarrows to nearby checkpoints, manned by Ukrainian veterans and anyone else with a gun and who's trusted in the neighborhood.
I'm living here. This is my home. All people in this district, we are saved.
Many Ukrainians are staying, determined to die fighting rather than lose their nation.
Richard, there's understandably a lot of concern tonight about that Russian convoy heading into the capital where you are. Do we know, does this represent a change in tactics by the Russians?
It seems to be. This convoy is big, dangerous, and heading this way. Up until now, Russia has tried to use small unit tactics and precision strikes, and it hasn't been going so well. And after what we saw in Kharkiv today and with this convoy, it seems that now they're going to a more traditional Russian strategy of siege and destruction.
All right. We wish you and your team continued safe passings. All right, thank you, Richard. In another major Ukrainian city, Kharkiv, in the northeast, not far from Russia, devastating new attacks and fighting today and more casualties. Matt Bradley spent weeks there. He's got the latest for us tonight.
Tonight, a worsening humanitarian catastrophe in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. Today, the scene of street-to-street combat that left at least 9 people dead, including 3 children and dozens injured.
This is a residential area with no military objects.
And added to mounting evidence that Vladimir Putin's war has put civilians in the crosshairs. A school destroyed not far from the center of the city. Missile fragments inside a residential apartment building. Today, the International Criminal Court launching a probe for war crimes against humanity. Maria Avdiva, a Kharkiv resident, shot this video inside Kharkiv at a children's clothing factory. Do you feel as though the Russians were deliberately targeting civilian targets?
For sure, they did it deliberately.
She said Russia did much of this bombing while negotiating peace talks.
This will happen with all enemies who will come here.
We are actually on the verge of a large humanitarian crisis.
Of most concern is the sight of cluster munitions, bombs that open in midair and spray smaller bombs.
It's clearly a cluster munition attack. We think that cluster munitions should never be used at all.
They're banned by 110 countries, though not by Russia or the U.S. Still, the U.S. hasn't used them since the first Gulf War over 30 years ago. Their use by the Russians in Ukraine, another sign of this war's growing savagery. Matt Bradley, NBC News, Uman, Ukraine.
And people from Kharkiv are among the 500,000 refugees the UN says have poured out of Ukraine since the invasion began. Many are making their way to western Ukraine to try to cross the border. Tom Yamas is there and spoke with some of them.
Tonight, fires burning outside of the Lviv train station in western Ukraine. Inside the station, the massive exodus comes to light.
This is what it looks and feels like to try to escape Ukraine right now. These are families trying to board those trains to Poland. These entranceways are filled with people. It is sad, it is desperate, but this is one of the only ways these families can get out. Who are you traveling with here?
I was my daughter.
Yevgenia and her daughter Emma are trying to reach Poland. But what truly breaks this mother's heart is that her husband is there to say goodbye. He says he's going back to help defend his country. Men of fighting age are not allowed to leave.
So hard. I'm so scared about my husband. I don't want to say goodbye.
Russia's victims in this war stretch farther than the battlefield.
It's a wonderful city, Kharkiv.
And it was being destroyed.
Yes. It's destroyed. Russia destroyed all.
Svetlana and her son David have traveled from the east to the west, trying to find a way out. Tomorrow, they leave for Romania. David has an ID card in case they are separated. He's only 9 years old, but already understands some of the realities of this war.
Putin monster. Putin is a monster. Yes. He killed us. He just killed.
As hundreds of thousands flee for safety, so many others staying put and preparing.
It makes temperature of fire more high.
In an old and unmarked warehouse that smelled like a gas station, we met Igor.
You're going to use this to take on the Russians?
Yes.
He's crafting these Molotov cocktails around the clock.
How many of these cocktails have you made?
2,500.
2,000?
Yes.
2,500.
Yes.
And he says he's not alone.
If you could talk to the Russian troops, the Russian military, what would you tell them?
Go away. Go out from Ukraine. Off from us. They have their own country. Why they're going to us?
And Tom, it's interesting to note this is not just one-way traffic we're looking at. There are people trying to get into Ukraine, correct?
That's right, Lester. Ukraine's president has called on any foreigners who want to help them fight Russia to contact the Ukrainian missions in their respective countries and sign up. And just today, we encountered a group who had traveled in from the UK. They told us they're Ukrainians who have come back to fight the Russians. Lester?
Tom Yamas tonight, thank you. And the U.S. and its allies are ramping up sanctions against Russia and sending Ukraine new military aid. All of it comes as President Biden prepares for tomorrow's State of the Union address. Kristen Welker is at the White House.
Tonight, as Russia wages war against Ukraine, the United States and its allies are unleashing an increasingly tough response, imposing unprecedented sanctions aimed at choking the Russian economy and stopping Vladimir Putin, who put some of his nuclear forces on higher alert, the Russian ambassador to the UN today.
So that is a kind of deterrence that we're exercising.
The U.S. says it's not changing its nuclear alert level. President Biden pressed by a reporter on the nuclear threat.
President, should Americans be worried about nuclear war?
No. Today, the U.S. targeting the country's central bank with sanctions, cutting it off from accessing U.S. assets and dollars. Even neutral Switzerland announced it will join in, imposing new penalties on Putin. It comes on the heels of the U.S. and its allies expelling some, though not all, of Russia's banks from the SWIFT financial system, effectively barring them from international financial transactions. Still, some want the White House to go even further.
I believe we should have used more of these tools prior to this brutal escalation to deter Putin and to weaken his capacity to wage war.
The Biden administration also announcing another $350 million in military aid to Ukraine, including anti-aircraft systems and ammunition. Countries like Sweden are sending in anti-tank missiles, the EU sending fighter jets, and the administration is sending $54 million in humanitarian aid. All of it comes on the eve of the president's first State of the Union address. In a new poll, only 33% of Americans approve of the president's handling of the Ukraine-Russia crisis. 47% disapprove, and a majority of Americans say the president cannot be trusted in a crisis. Ukraine, now another crisis in focus tomorrow night.
Is he rewriting it to have it focus on this moment?
Every State of the Union address is an opportunity for the president delivering it to speak directly to the American people about what is happening in that moment, the progress that's being made, and also the challenges we're facing.
Kristen, we just learned the Biden administration is expelling 12 Russian diplomats. Do we know why?
Well, Lester, Press Secretary Jen Psaki said those diplomats were engaging in espionage, which is a clear violation of their status here. Lester.
Kristen Welker, thank you. Make sure to join us for special coverage of the President's State of the Union address tomorrow night at 9 Eastern Time, 6 Pacific. This evening, some Russians are reacting with increasing concern about the war and the global sanctions rippling through the economy. But despite those sanctions, Russia maintains an export economic lifeline. Keir Simmons is in Moscow now with that part of the story.
Tonight, protests are growing, and so are signs of panic amongst some middle-class Russians. Crowds lining up at banks, many hoping to withdraw dollars or euros. Tonight, the Russian ruble has fallen to a record low. The Russian stock market suspended all week, with fears it could crash. In a mall, we find more lines at ATMs.
Everyone's scared now.
And meet musicians Marina, who lived in Boston for 6 years, and Natalie.
My husband was trying to buy foreign currency yesterday. He didn't get a chance to do that.
Couldn't get any?
No.
Now they fear they may be banned from Europe, a new iron curtain between Russia and the West.
We don't want war.
But there are few signs President Putin is listening, meeting morose-looking central bankers today at a distance. Though Putin does have support, including a thumbs up from this man. Putin is a world leader, he says. Others openly questioning the Russian leader's reasoning.
No war from Ukraine.
And what do you feel about President Putin's nuclear threats over the weekend?
I think he can, because I think he's crazy now.
But President Biden and the West left a carve-out in these sanctions that likely still benefits President Putin. Oil and gas is still allowed to flow out of Russia, a trade worth hundreds of millions of dollars a day. Lester?
Keir Simmons in Moscow tonight. Thank you. In just 60 seconds, the propaganda war over Ukraine. Are social media giants doing enough to combat disinformation? And as masks come off in schools, we look at the COVID vaccine and younger kids with new questions being raised tonight about the effectiveness. The battle for Ukraine is not only being fought on the ground, it is also being fought online. Facebook and Twitter saying they're taking action to stop the spread of disinformation. But is it enough? We get more on this from Jolene Kent.
These are faces of the Russian propaganda effort. Irina and Vladimir appear to be journalists, except they're not real people. Their images are computer-generated to create fake social media accounts targeting Ukrainians on Facebook and Instagram. They're part of 2 pro-Russian covert influence operations disclosed by Twitter and Meta, Facebook's parent company.
These actors, what they're essentially trying to do is undermine trust in the Ukrainian government,
suggest that the war is going very poorly for Ukraine or to praise the work of Russian actors.
Meta says 40 of these fake profiles, pages, and groups were taken down over the weekend. Twitter tells NBC News it permanently banned similar accounts. Facebook also revealed a separate hacking campaign linked to Belarus, targeting real Ukrainian military members, public officials, and journalists.
Are Facebook and Instagram users safe as this invasion continues on your platforms?
I think everyone needs to take steps to make sure that they're safe online. We're taking every step that we can to make sure that our users and our platforms are safe.
Meta says it doesn't know how long the users behind these accounts have been active, but believes the group is linked to other trolls who spread misinformation about the 2020 U.S. presidential election and the COVID vaccine. Despite tech giants taking action, bad actors often work across platforms, like this account called Ukraine Today, removed by Facebook but still active on Google News. Google did not respond to our requests for comment.
The challenge is they oftentimes don't know what they're looking for. The only way to really figure that out is with public-private partnerships, social media companies working with governments to try and figure out who's really behind the accounts.
And Joe, speaking of concerns about what's happening online, Ukraine received a major delivery from Elon Musk today. What was it?
Yeah, that's right, Lester. 48 hours after Ukraine's digital minister asked Elon Musk to help with internet access that's been disrupted by this invasion, Musk appears to have delivered. The minister tweeting this photo saying thanks for these Starlink terminals. They're small devices that connect users to satellite internet services from SpaceX. And Musk replying, "You are most welcome." Lester?
All right, Jolene Kent with that. Thank you. And the backlash to Russia's invasion has now grown to the world of sports. Russia will miss out on the World Cup now that it's been suspended indefinitely from international soccer. It comes after Olympic officials called for Russia to be excluded from international events. The NHL also announcing it is suspending ties to Russia, and Russia has been barred from hosting sanctioned boxing matches.